everyone, welcome to Indus Special. I'm Meshal Malik. Pakistan is home to over 220 million souls. Amongst the masses and masses of people, we have stories of women who defy all standards, women who go beyond the ordinary. The women of Pakistan are resilient, fearless, and brave. They have excelled and conquered almost every field, from medicine to mountain cycling. The stories of these women must be told, celebrated, and understood, because from these incredible women, people all across the world can draw inspiration. We're in conversation with some of these women today. Joining us right now is Dr. Fatima Ali Haider, founder of the Grief Directory. The aim of Grief Directory is to help grieving families affected by terrorism and establish support groups. The Grief Directory aims to empower families, especially women and children, affected by political violence and terrorism. Dr. Fatima, you are the founder of the Grief Directory. And before we get to what this initiative is, would you please share your story with us? How and why you began this?
Samar, my husband was an eye surgeon, and on 18th of February 2013, on a seemingly very ordinary day, when he was taking my younger son to school, both my son and my husband were targeted in an incident of sectarian violence. And unfortunately, I lost both of them. I had a 15-year-old son at that time and a 6-month-old baby daughter at that time. And for the first 6 months or so, which is basically understood as the time for grieving, I could not make any sense out of it because it was a huge tragedy. It was very sudden. It was the loss of not only a spouse and a breadwinner, but also the very, very painful, perhaps the most painful loss of a child as well. But I've been very lucky because being a woman, I was given support by other women, especially Dr. Nirmeen, one of my best friends and my husband's class fellow. And as we remember now and we reflect, I started writing on my laptop, thinking whatever came to my mind. And one day she came to me and she asked me what I was writing. And I said that I keep thinking that just like in times of happiness, we should be organized in times of grief as well. But unfortunately, in times of grief, and especially in situations like these where there is sectarian violence attached, where there is fear, the element of fear which is very strong, the family is not only struggling with grief, but with the chaos of fear and isolation as well. So I told her that my idea was to organize something which could be called the Grief Directory, very similar to the idea of the wedding registry abroad, where the about to be married couple has is registered in a superstore where all the gifts are given according to their needs and not in a very haphazard fashion, but whatever they need. If they need a cutlery set, or if they need a lamp, or if they need a tablecloth or a bed cover, so the families and the friends give support, give them those gifts according to their needs. And based on that, we kept developing this idea, but what really, I think, kicked off this idea and we decided to start it in an organized fashion was the APS tragedy, unfortunately. The APS tragedy made me realize that I was not the only mother who was grieving for a child. That day, families, mothers like me became a community. And that was a very, very unfortunate thing to realize. So in January 2015, we started the Grief Directory. The Grief Directory basically acts as a bridge of compassion between those people who volunteer to help, and on the other hand are those families which are affected by political violence and terrorism.
Dr. Fatima, I'm really, really sorry for your loss, and no words that I could say could mean enough, but you took so much of the pain around you and you turned it into something that provided support to others. Where did you muster up that strength, and where did you find that courage to do so?
Shall, if I'm allowed to say so, it is very important for any individual to realize that the first responsibility of an individual is towards herself. And once you realize that, I think that is where the journey of healing begins. Throughout my journey of grief and loss, I was told that I had to live for my children. I had to live for the rest of the family, my husband's old parents, my mother. But I think the most important turning point was when I realized that I could not give hope to my children if I didn't have any for myself. So, and based on that, I think that the turning point was when I realized that this hope I had to develop not only through helping my own children, but ensuring the safety of other children who had suffered as well. Obviously, I could not bring my loved ones back, but I could reach out to those who were suffering. I could reach out to those whose problems and whose needs perhaps I understood better than those who had not faced such an incident and such a tragedy. I think the other factor which has contributed very much is the support that I have given by my family, and especially my friends, especially my female friends. So I think it has been a journey of women empowerment, I think.
Please tell us a little more about that. How were your female friends especially more supportive? And you keep reiterating this, that you drew more strength from the females around you than anything else. So in times of difficulty, how was it that you all gathered, and how do you feel like the females around you gave you support?
I think in Pakistan, we struggle with a lot of stereotypes, as someone else has already mentioned. And in times of grief, those become highlighted. So living in Pakistan as a widow is a difficult thing to do. Grieving for a child and trying to talk about it needs a space which unfortunately does not exist in Pakistan. And my female friends, I think the way they've supported me is because being a female, they understood where I was coming from, how I was grieving for a child, what did it mean to lose a breadwinner, what did it mean to lose a companion, and also to understand how women's roles are undermined, especially in terms of tragedy. One of the incidents one of the conversations that I had with my son, I could clearly remember, because in the early days when we had so many people coming to our house to offer condolences, I heard this sentence repeatedly being said to my 15-year-old son, that he had to take care of his mother and his sister. And during all this grief and all that chaos, I felt so sorry for him, because I thought that this child has not only lost a father and a son, he is perhaps now on the brink of losing the rest of his young adulthood and his childhood. And it's something which his other friends and other peers are enjoying very much. So one day we had a conversation. I sat down with him and I said, look, I have to tell you something. Now that your father is no more, I want to make it very clear that now the man of the house is Mama and not you. And you have to enjoy your early adulthood years, you have to enjoy your education, and you have to pursue your career, and you have to pursue life as much as possible the way you wanted it to be in your father's life. And I think that it was the correct decision, because as a mother, it is my responsibility to ensure not only my children's physical safety, but also their emotional and mental well-being. And especially teenagers who are grieving, who are suffering, who are being sometimes isolated under such circumstances of fear and isolation, I think their emotional needs are very specific that a woman can understand. Where I think we need to change our social structure is that with such families, rather than interfering with the children's upbringing and with the needs of the widows themselves, I think the role of the woman should be empowered and emphasized. The woman's role in her children's life should be respected, her decisions should be supported, and whatever she does for her child should be encouraged more. The communication between the mother and the child, direct communication should be encouraged more rather than indirect communication. And how a mother can be supported through the Grief Directory, all our projects are focused on supporting women through education, through health, and health is not only in terms of physical health, but emotional and mental health is so very important.
Dr. Fatma, when I met you before, and even while talking to you, you exude a sense of positivity. You embody almost an ethic of hope. And I wonder, how do you, through the Grief Directory, pass on the message of hope to other grieving families?
Meshal, my mentor, Professor Marie Breen-Smith, who's an Irish and who has done excellent work on the Northern Ireland conflict resolution, says something very beautiful. She once wrote to me and she said that I have to tell you something, that grief is not an emotion, it is a practice. So I think for families like ours, especially for women, sometimes I understand that it becomes very, very difficult, especially under such testing circumstances as mine. It becomes very difficult to find grief and to find hope and then to hold on to that hope. But little actions, day by day, moment by moment, we have to hold on to our hope. And as mothers, I think our hope lies in our children. So I think that their growth, their prosperity, and that of our country can only come if we have hopeful mothers. But yes, it is a big struggle, I understand, but it is not impossible. That is the message that I try to communicate to other families by practicing hope, by the way I talk to them, by the way I try my best to reach out to them, to support them. Through our Facebook page of the Grief Directory, as unfortunate as it is, I think we have been able to now create a space where women who have lost their husbands, their breadwinners, and women who have lost their children are now comfortable in reaching out to us directly or to talk about their loss and their grief, what their journey has been like that, which I think is a huge vacuum in Pakistan otherwise, where grief is not encouraged to be talked about. We are very happy that we are trying to create that space.
And how is you talked a little about the reaction being that they open up more to you, the families that you reach out to, but can you tell us a little more how they react to such a support group? Because it is unique having such a support group and knowing that you are being taken care of by at least people who are understanding of you, of your emotions, and who are empathetic towards you at the most. So what is their reaction?
I think that we do have excellent support group systems through our culture, where women sometimes talk to other women. But what is specific about grief and pain is that sometimes you get the other feeling that unless the other person has suffered a loss very similar to yours, the other person may or perhaps cannot understand what one is going through. So I think there are two aspects of support groups important. I think in this age of social media, the support through social media is also very important. But then focusing on the support groups which involve physical presence, that I think perhaps are very invaluable and should be encouraged in Pakistan, where mothers who have suffered the loss of a child, where women who have suffered the loss of a breadwinner, because all these are struggles which have their own peculiar needs. And I think when it comes to terrorism and political violence, some issues are very much relevant to the situation, the peculiarity of the situation as well. So the most important thing is perhaps that the person you are talking to is very much in control. She has completed a journey which tells you that there is some hope, that life does not come to an end, that life does continue in some sorts, not in the same way, but in other positive ways as well. And then I think the commonality of the grief and loss, I think, does help other families and other women to open up.
Dr. Fatma will continue with this discussion. We have to go to a short break. When we return, we're going to explore other stories of amazing women. Stay with us. Dr. Fatma, as Summer also mentioned here, that social media plays a large part in creating perceptions and also relearning certain perceptions. And you also mentioned how through social media you can channel a positive initiative. Were you able to come into contact with other women across the world who are perhaps grieving and suffering loss, or was it more focused towards giving support to women in Pakistan alone?
Through the social media, I think if you allow me to remember to mention this, the first responsibility of the social media is to cover the incidents very carefully. Because in the first few months of this tragedy, because of the magnitude, and obviously it is very important that you share whatever news is happening in Pakistan, sometimes the privacy of that family is invaded. So I think that it's very, very important that whatever news is shared, whatever aspects of the incident is covered, that should be shared with responsibility. And I think that this is also the point where we have tried to make a difference. That social media is not just for sharing news immediately, but also for sharing the journeys of different people
in a respectful way,
and a very long time after the tragedy has happened. Next year in February, it will be almost 6 years since I lost my husband and my son. And families like mine still grieve, they still remember their loved ones, they still think about them. So how they cope with their own journeys is very, very important. And I think social media is an excellent source where we can do that, especially to raise the profile of the communities under persecution, how the families of belonging to the communities under persecution, where women are especially suffering. The Hazara women are suffering. People from other communities are suffering. From the Christian community are suffering. I think social media is an excellent source. As far as reaching out of other people from all over the globe is concerned, yes, we now see a response from other countries. Some of the families, Pakistani families who have settled abroad, they also share their experience. And it is very surprising, for me at least, that people who are living in the so-called West world, they also feel this need that the grief should be shared. So this is something that we are very proud of, that the Grief Directory is not only encouraging people from Pakistan, but from all over the world to share their loss, to share their grief, and to talk about their pain, and also to get inspired by the fact that while there is negativity around us in these unfortunate circumstances, and terrorism is not just restricted to Pakistan, it is a global issue now, there is hope in Pakistan, and women who are facing such tragedies in Pakistan do survive, and they do survive well.
On that note, we'll take a short break. Stay with us. You interact with women on a daily basis. What message can you give to other women about supporting each other, about coming together as a community and being there for each other through thick and thin?
Meshal, I would take it from 3 aspects. Number 1 is that the women's, I could not stress this point more, that the role of other women in support of a woman who has faced a loss, a tragedy, or even in other difficult situations could not be emphasized more, because it is only a woman who can understand the other person's need. Through my own experience, what I realize is that if I have experienced a certain situation, it then puts a lot of responsibility on my own shoulders to realize what could be the needs of women who are in my similar situation. So through one of the projects that we are doing, and what we realized through our experience of working with other women, is that when such a loss or tragedy happens, sometimes very basic information is not available for women. So women don't know how to close a bank account when a husband has passed away, unfortunately. Women don't know how to have their ID cards renewed, how to make a passport, how to write a check sometimes. because sometimes through our culture and sometimes through lack of education and information, it is these very basic information is lacking for women, where women struggle. And I would like to mention here that one of the most important things that women don't realize, especially in times of sudden loss and tragedy, is their rights of inheritance, and what are the laws, and how can they have their own rights. And that I think is the most important thing. The present government has established a helpline as well. The third thing, I think the most important message that I would like to give to other Pakistani women is that our first responsibility is to ourselves, because it is only when we have hope we can give it to our children. And the second thing is that we are responsible for our children, for our loved ones, but we also have to raise strong daughters, resilient daughters, daughters who have hope for Pakistan. And one day I would like to believe that just like Pakistan is prominent in other areas, sports, education, Pakistan should be identified as a country not just affected by terrorism, but Pakistan having stronger women who have fought terrorism and political violence.
That's a brilliant note to end on, and I couldn't have said it better myself. That's what Dr. Fatma said, and that's a message we'd like to send out to the world. We have powerful women here, women who have defied all odds, and we've talked to some of those brilliant ones here. Thank you, Dr. Fatma, for joining us. Thank you, Ushna, for joining us. Thank you, Myra, for joining us. It was lovely talking to you all. Hope you liked today's episode. We'll see you again tomorrow.